This week we are going to cover how to code scripts. And scripts are the SQL version of programming. So you're going to read through chapter 14 in the book, and then you are going to go through the lecture demo. And you will notice that a lot of programming commands that you are familiar with are available in SQL. So as far as selection goes, there is an if-else structure. There is, for repetition, a while structure. The break and continue commands are available. Try and catch for error handling is available. So quite a few statements that you are familiar with are available here too. So the thing that you have to learn is the syntax so that you know how to use them in SQL. And I know we have used the go command, but here is basically where you will be using it a bit more because each script has to execute in its own little batch, and a batch is just kind of a unit. And between the batches, you have to put the word go. So the 5 statements that are listed here, some of which we are going to work on this week, and some of them will be in upcoming weeks. You cannot combine them with other statements, so they require their own little batch. So basically, they just have to be in between go commands. So we start with creating variables, and there are 2 different types. There's a scalar variable that this is basically what you guys are used to because it's a variable that stores a single value. And then there are table values that actually store an entire result set. So if you think about the query and the result set that it creates, a table variable would store that result set. In SQL, variables have to start with an @ sign. And so if you're going to create a variable, you have to use the keyword declare, and then you have to put the @ sign in front of the variable name. After the variable name, you have to tell it the data type. And these data types are the same as the ones that we used when we created our tables for our database. Okay, so all the same data types are used for the variables. And kind of a little refresher from programming, the scope of a variable determines where it can be used in the program. And SQL variables can only be used in the batch they are defined in. So in between the go commands, if you create a variable, you can use it, but outside of that, you cannot. Okay, and these types of variables are called local variables. If you want to assign a value to a variable, you have to use the set command. Okay, and so I have several examples. So you can set it to a single value, or you can set it to the result of a subquery. Okay, or you can set it to the result of a calculation. If you want to print variables, the print statement only prints character data. So if you have a number, you have to end up having to convert it to variable character. So you can just use the convert function, tell it what you want to convert it to, and then you give it the name of your variable. Okay, and so these are some examples of how you would print out numbers using the print statement. And as I mentioned earlier, table variables are variables that store an entire result set. So whether you create a scalar variable or a table variable depends on the results of your query. If the results are going to be one single value, it's a scalar variable. If the results are going to be multiple columns, multiple rows, it's going to be a table variable. Okay, and so this is an example of creating a table variable. So we're calling it big vendors, and we're indicating that the data type here is a table. And then in parentheses, we are giving it the columns and the data types. Okay, and then from that point on, you can see we have an insert statement, and we're selecting the two columns that we created. And we're going to be retrieving the data from vendors. And here we are going to be kind of filtering out the smaller invoice totals. So any invoice total greater than 5,000, that vendor ID and the vendor name are going to go into our big vendor table. And I do encourage you guys, go ahead and copy this, paste it right into SSMS and run it so you can see what it does. I think that is really helpful for learning these commands. So we have scalar variables, we have table variables. We also have something called temporary variables. So anytime you're doing a complicated script, and normally you run a complex script and you can only see the final result set. But if you want to check some of the result sets that are in between, like the intermittent ones, you can actually create something called a temporary table. And you can do a local table or a global table. For a local table, you put a hashtag in front of it. And for a global, you put two hashtags. And it's the same create table command that we have been using. So what's the difference between local and global? Local is your machine can use it. Global is basically anybody on your network. Okay. And probably since you're working from home, you are the only person on your network. But if you were in an office setting on an intranet, other people would be able to use it. Okay, so here is an example of a global one that's basically retrieving social security numbers randomly. And it's populating a table. Here is an example. It's called top vendors. And this is a local temporary table. But you'll notice that with these temp tables, you know, you can do joins and selects on them just like any other table. So this little graphic here summarizes all the different types of table, because now you probably are thinking, boy, we got lots of different tables here. So we have a standard table, which is just a normal table that you create. It's a database object. You have a temporary table. So while the SSMS session is going, the table is available. You have a table variable that is basically going to be available while the batch is executing. So in between the go commands, that's where the access is. You have a derived table that is available within the statement while it is executing. And then you have a view. Okay, and a view is a database object, just like a table is. So a couple things to remember about all of this. Standard tables and views are database objects, which means they are permanent. Okay, if you use the drop command, you can delete them. Otherwise, they are part of the database. Derived tables and table variables are stored in memory. Um, because they are stored in memory, they're going to be little better performers, but they are temporary. And then if you're comparing views to standard tables, views tend to be a little faster, mainly because we're kind of picking and choosing the columns that we're going to be storing in a view. Then we get into statements that alter the flow of execution. So we go through if else, and this is the syntax for an if else. You'll notice that after the condition you're testing, you have a begin and an end statement. And after the else, you have a begin and an end statement. After the end statement is where the semicolons go. Okay, so I have some examples here. The first one is just basically checking to see if it's Saturday or Sunday. And then it's saying weekend or weekday. Here we've got a subquery that it's checking. Okay, to see if the maximum weight is less than the results of our subquery. Okay, and so you can actually run all of these. This is very, very common. If you want to see if a database object is there, okay, if it exists, if it's not null, then it's there. This can be used if you are creating maybe a temporary table or something else. You want to check to see if it exists, because if it's there, you're going to delete it because you're going to create a new one. While statements are loops, and so you can kind of see the example here. Again, we're using begin and end. And as you can see here, we do have a nested if else inside this, which is perfectly fine. I mean, you could put, just like in regular programming, you could put a loop inside an if else. You can put an if else inside a loop. How we quite often use loops when we're doing scripting is we use them to retrieve one row at a time. And so that is done with something called a cursor. And you end up declaring it. It's a cursor for a select statement. And you end up declaring it. You have to open it. And then you have to use the fetch command, and it will retrieve one row at a time. Try catch error handling will allow the program to continue running even if there is an error. That is why people use it. So this is just an example of how you might code that. And so the try block has begin try and end try. In between would be the command that you think may cause an error. Okay, and then right below that, you have to have your catch block. And so this is obviously going to throw an error because we have 1 divided by 0. So if you run that, you should see the error message. That is a good one to practice with. Okay, and then these are just some kind of general rules to remember about try catch. And I will let you kind of read through the rest. I've kind of hit the high points here. There are some system commands that you can execute. And there is something called dynamic SQL as well. I'll let you guys read about that. And then we get into our textbook assignment. So you can see that for the different tasks and scenarios, there are videos that you guys can watch. And this is just to give you practice creating different types of scripts. So you're going to start with scripts that have variables. You'll get into table variables and and scalar variables and temporary tables and all that fun stuff. Then you'll do some scripts that change the flow. You'll get the opportunity to create a row cursor and see how that works. And we'll also use some system commands. Okay, and then finally, we'll practice using the try catch a little bit. So you guys can practice that. And basically, you'll see how all of that works. Then we get into the lab assignment. And this is where you are going to make up your own scripts. And so you have to do a script that deals with variables. So you need a query that has a scalar variable and a query that has a table variable. And there are lots of examples. If you look in the book and you look in the lecture, there are a ton of examples. Okay. Also in the textbook assignment, tons and tons of examples. Okay, so you can do something similar to the examples. It can't be identical, but it can be similar. I mean, here's big vendors. You could do small vendors, you know. So that is the first task. The second one is temporary tables. You have to have a query with a local temporary and a global temporary table. You have to create a query that uses an if statement. You have to create a query that uses a while statement with a row cursor. Okay. And so again, lots of examples for you guys to look at. And then you need to do a query that utilizes a try catch. And so you need a temporary table that's going to add 2 records to the table. And you're going to use the try catch for error handling. And then you can use the row count to see if the records were added. And I'm giving you a huge hint here. In your textbook assignment, task 4 has something very similar. Okay, so that is the assignment. And then there is also a unit test. This is a little shorter. It's only 25 points, 22 questions, and you will be able to take this 3 times. For those of you that are taking the test multiple times, you have noticed how your score improves each time. So please take the test multiple times. It's only going to help your score and it's going to help you prepare for the certification exam. And you should take note, there are 5 questions that are randomly drawn from the pool, and those 5 will change each time. But what that means is there's 17 questions that are the same every time you're going to retake the test. And so you all should at least take it twice because you will get a better score. Then finally at the bottom, I have different resources on what is covered this week in case you want some more information. If you run into problems or if you have questions, please let me know and have an awesome week.